Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the major tactical themes in England's 2-0 win over Germany. So when we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have both sides playing in a 3-4-2-1, with Leon Goretzka starting for Germany. So in today's video, we're going to break down how both sides look to approach the game, how Kai Havertz was the key man for Germany, and how England were able to win the game. So with England playing in a 3-4-3, it was clear that England were looking to match up Germany across the pitch. It should be Kane, Saka, and Sterling stepping to the center backs, the wing backs in Trippier and Shaw pushing out to Kimmich and Gosens, Phillips and Rice dealing with Goretzka and Kroos, and then you have 3v3 at the back. Here you can see the England press from the left with Sterling ahead of Ginter, Luke Shaw pushing towards Joshua Kimmich, and Rice stepping into the path of Goretzka with Kane blocking off the passing lane into Hummels. Meanwhile, if you shift to the right, you have Kane on Hummels, Saka preparing to step towards Rudiger, and Trippier tight on Gosens. However, with England looking to press from the front in the earlier stages, the biggest issue that they encountered was the Germany front three, with Muller and Havertz dropping off into that midfield zone that does create overloads unless Walker and Maguire step tight to close them down. The other issue is that if those two players were able to combine with the midfield or any one of the back five, they're pulling out Walker and Maguire, which creates space for Timo Werner to break into. Following Ginter winning an aerial duel over Kane, the ball falls to Goretzka in that halfway circle with Phillips and Rice out of position. That's where you see Havertz dropping towards the right of Rice, and Goretzka bypasses Phillips and plays the ball into the path of Havertz, and as Havertz carries that ball through the final third, Rice attempts to shift across to close him down, and that's where you see Werner making a run between Walker and Stones, and Havertz splits the England defenders to place Werner in this position in left half space, but he's unable to beat Pickford from a tight angle. This time we see Hummels on the ball with Kane looking to shift across to apply pressure, and you have Goretzka dropping into the halfway circle to pull out Rice. As Hummels carries the ball into the halfway circle, that's where you end up seeing Kai Havertz dropping off Maguire to create a 2v1 in that midfield zone. That ends up seeing Rice being pulled towards his left, and that allows Goretzka to receive the ball in the midfield zone, and now that forces Phillips to shift across to cover for Rice, and that's where Muller looks to make a lateral run between the lines. When Muller receives the ball, Walker does step out, but Muller gets a foot on it to guide it into the path of Kai Havertz. When Havertz receives the ball, he should be looking to play in Muller, who runs off Phillips and Rice into the gap between Maguire and Stones as Maguire doesn't step. But from that position, Havertz ends up making the wrong decision and sliding the ball out wide to Kimmich. Following a loose Sterling pass in the German third, the ball is instantly switched over Rice into the path of Havertz, finding space in an inside right position ahead of the halfway line. That's where you have Stones and Maguire retreating, and he has Timo Werner towards his left to ignite a break. Havertz ends up carrying the ball into the England third with Walker looking to shift across to apply pressure, and that's where you now see Werner bending towards his left as Stones is in a poor position to cut out the pass, and Havertz ends up sliding the ball across Walker to place Werner in a 1v1 with Stones. From here, Werner should be shifting towards his left to bypass the England center back, but he looks to cut into his right and he allows Walker back into the game. Now Werner can't shift towards his right to get a clean look on goal, so he ends up dragging the ball towards left half space, but Stones does well to get across to halt the danger. If we look to another example, here you could see England's press once again with Luke Shaw stepping towards Kimmich, and that's where you see Havertz dropping off into the midfield zone to drag out Rice. Kimmich ends up playing the ball across Shaw into the path of Goretzka, who drags out Stones, and you could see Muller also dropping off into his own half to pull out Maguire. That results in Goretzka playing a first-time ball across Stones into the path of Muller, and from there, Muller locates that Maguire isn't tight on him, and you could see Werner looking to spin into that Maguire-Walker gap as Trippier keeps him onside. Luckily for England once again, Muller's pass is slightly overhit, and Walker is able to recover. And then even following Raheem Sterling being dispossessed by Toni Kroos, it's Havertz once again receiving the ball beyond Kyle Walker and just ahead of Stones, and he's able to slide in Thomas Muller free on goal, but from this position, Muller shanks his shot inches wide of the net. But it also creates space for Goretzka to charge into, if Phillips and Rice were caught in the midfield zone. We saw in the earlier stages Goretzka was making forward runs and carrying the ball into the England half and into those gaps of space if Havertz and Muller was pulling out the center backs. Following Saka being dispossessed by Hummels, the ball falls to Goretzka and neither Rice or Phillips are near him, and that's where you see Werner looking to make a run in between Stones and Walker. And while Goretzka's pass does find Timo Werner, he's unable to control the ball and it falls into the path of the on-rushing Pickford, who's able to clear his lines. Here you could see England's press in full effect with Kimmich sliding the ball across shot to Goretzka, and he ends up pulling out Rice, with Maguire being dragged into the German half by Havertz and Phillips ahead of Kroos dropping into an inside left position. Goretzka ends up playing the ball into the path of Thomas Muller and he drags out Stones into the halfway circle, and with Maguire dragged towards the touchline by Havertz, now we end up seeing Goretzka preparing to run off Rice into that gap between Maguire and Stones. Muller does well to spin across Stones, and that's where you see Goretzka continuing his run, but Maguire doesn't get back into his position in time, and Kyle Walker's ball watching as Timo Werner's looking to get back on side. That gives Muller that large gap to split Walker and Maguire, and that's where he's able to locate Goretzka's run, and from this position you could see that Goretzka's free on goal with Rice looking to track back desperately. However, Rice is able to recover his position, and he ends up pulling back Goretzka as he concedes a free kick. Theoretically, given the fact that England were playing an identical system, they should have been able to cause Germany similar problems. However, when the Germans looked to press high from the front, Kane was unable to get service in behind that German backline, and they were comfortable with playing a high line given the fact that England struggled to get service into the striker. England looked to get Rice and Phillips on the ball by having them drop off into those inside left and right positions, but for instance, if you had Rice dropping off into that inside left position while Shaw pushed forward, then Havertz would shift out to close him down, and the same thing would apply on the opposite side if Phillips looked to drop in between Trippier and Walker. Then you'd see Muller shifting across to close him down as well. That allowed Kroos and Goretzka to sit in that midfield zone, and they were able to help out with Saka and Sterling dropping off into that area. There were times where Germany looked to drop off into a 5-4-1, and what you ended up seeing was that Saka and Sterling were looking to move into that midfield zone to get on the ball, but what ended up happening there was now you ended up seeing 2v1s and sometimes 3v1s in that zone. If Saka looked to drop off Rudiger, Toni Kroos and Muller would shift across to close him down, and Goretzka would shift to the center of the pitch to provide cover. And the same thing occurred on the opposite flank. Yes, Sterling could drop off deeper as well, but the Germans were content with that. You'd have Goretzka and Havertz shift across, and then Ginter would be able to allow him to shift into that zone because now Sterling would be unable to dribble across three opponents, and they struggle to get service into Kane. Later on, you have Saka picking up the ball in a deep inside right position, with Kane occupied by Hummels, Trippier being marked by Gozens, and then look what's ahead of Saka. Rudiger, Kroos, and Goretzka shifting over. That ultimately forces Saka to play the ball back to his defense. Here you see Saka receiving the ball from Trippier across Gozens, but you have Rudiger and Kroos shifting across to apply pressure, and that's where you end up seeing them swarm Saka when he attempts to turn, and Kroos gets a foot in. Here you can see Saka picking up the ball away from Rudiger pressure, but he's instantly swarmed by Rudiger and Kroos, and you can see Kane making a run across Hummels, and Sterling in a central position looking to make a run beyond Rudiger and Kroos. This is where you need Saka to play an incisive pass in a tight area, but when he tries to split Rudiger and Kroos, it's the German midfielder who gets a foot on it. On paper, this should be really straightforward for England. You want Harry Kane to drop off into that midfield zone to drag markers towards him, and he has the ability to bypass pressure, and that's where you want Saka and Sterling to make runs in behind. To no surprise, when Kane dropped off into that midfield zone in that opening half, he was able to get England into some good promising positions, but the problem here was that it took Harry Kane 40 minutes to do that. In terms of the second half, the overall pattern of the game didn't really change. We ended up seeing England revert from pressing higher up the pitch, and now they were looking to box in the German midfield by moving into more of a pentagonal shape. The front three were sitting off Rudiger, Hummels, and Ginter, and they were allowing them time and space on the ball, and then Phillips and Rice were ready to step forward to apply pressure if Kroos and Goretzka received possession. This ultimately still created a similar issue for England, as if Muller or Havertz were able to drop off into that midfield zone and Walker and Maguire didn't step towards them, then Havertz and Muller were able to receive the ball in pockets of space, and then it was down to them to create chances. This is an example of Maguire just ahead of Kane, and you end up seeing Goretzka drop deeper to pull out Phillips, and that allows Maguire to bypass Kane and Phillips to find Muller dropping in towards the halfway circle. But luckily for England, the German side failed to maximize that threat, and frankly, the game changed when both managers shifted to their bench. We ended up seeing Saka be replaced by Jack Grealish, and Timo Werner was replaced by Serge Gnabry. The issue that Germany encountered here was that now England were able to push a bit higher up the pitch because Serge Gnabry wasn't looking to make runs in behind their backline, and he was often checking in towards the ball to receive possession. Meanwhile, when you look to England, Jack Grealish and Raheem Sterling swapped flanks. And while you can say that Jack Grealish was involved in both goals, ironically, the first goal was down to a German breakdown in Kane's movement in the build-up to England's winner. This time it's Sterling from that deeper position dragging out Rudiger, but unlike several attempts, here he's able to bypass Kroos and Rudiger, and you can see Kane occupying Hummels and Ginter, with Grealish just ahead of Ginter and Gozens, and Shaw free out in a wide left position. When Sterling plays the ball into Harry Kane, look at how much attention he draws. You have Ginter and Hummels looking to step towards him, but rather than focusing on Luke Shaw's movement, Kimmich is also wary of Harry Kane. Kane ends up squaring the ball to Grealish, who slides it out to Shaw, and when Shaw receives the ball in left half space, he has Sterling and Kane making runs into that 6-yard area, and all he has to do is bypass Kimmich and Ginter to find Sterling in that 6-yard box, and that results in England's opener. And then the second one stemmed from Serge Gnabry losing possession to Luke Shaw, and once again it was Harry Kane's movement that created space for his teammates. So as you could see, while it was logical for Gareth Southgate to match Germany's system, that didn't necessarily improve England's play here. Kai Havertz was still the key player from open play, and frankly Germany were wasteful in the final third. And while you can give Southgate credit for bringing on Jack Grealish, the decision to bring on Serge Gnabry was ineffective, as Germany were responsible for their downfall. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.